What's the right angle? Hey, welcome back to my microblading studio and welcome back to Brow Tap. This is a channel for PMU artists who are ready to take their business, their income, their skills, and their lives to the next level. I'm Alex, your host, a microblading studio owner. This is my studio, microblading artist, a course creator, in-person educator, online educator, and the creator of this YouTube channel. Today we are going to continue on our series of the 3 keys to creating beautiful, crisp, clean microblading strokes. Last video we went over key number 1, which was the speed of creating your strokes. If you haven't watched yet, go watch it here and then come back. This week is key number 2, and that is the angle. That is angle. It's angle, but it's the angle that you're holding the blade at while making your strokes. So let's get into it. Number 2 is the angle of the blade, and I do think that key number 3, depth, is the most important, but angle is a close second. So simply put, it needs to be at 90 degrees to the skin with every single stroke. 90 degrees always. We don't want it leaning from one side or to the other side, because this is going to implant the pigment incorrectly. The reason we don't want this to happen is, first of all, implant the pigment incorrectly, and then that is going to cause improper color healing, a lot of times more on that ashy, cool, grayish blue side. We don't want that, right? But also you are causing trauma to the skin. You are not creating that crisp, clean stroke in that upright 90-degree position. You're putting it to the side and you're going in sideways to the skin, and that is going to create trauma and can actually cause scarring. And these are 2 things we do not want to give our clients to cause our clients. Now, if you are always implanting pigment in the 90-degree upright position, you will be able to create the crispest, cleanest, healed results. You're not going to be creating too big of a stroke, too big of an actual channel in the skin, and it's going to heal super nicely. It's not going to blur or blow out more than it actually needs to. That being said, a flexi blade like this, and we talked about blade types in a past video, so if you're unsure, please go watch that. But a flexi blade like this is an amazing tool. This exactly here is my favorite blade. But when you put it, well, I'll show you first. It flexes. So when you push on the blade, it flexes a little bit, which is great for creating curvature, for creating art. But when you actually put it to the skin, it also will flex on the skin. So you need to have number 3, depth and pressure down as well when using this blade, to make sure that it doesn't, even if you're holding it at 90 degrees, it's not flexing, you're not pushing too hard and it's flexing and it's going in sideways. The great alternative to this when you are starting out or you are unsure of your angle and your pressure is to use a hard blade. So once again, I did a whole video on difference between all types of blades, flexi and hard blades included. So you can see this blade, it's gold wrapped. That's not what makes a difference. Yeah, it's a different color, but this gold wrap is actually metal. So it is a hard blade, and when you see that when I push on it, it's not flexing at all. So while this makes it a little bit harder to create curvature, to create art in the skin, when we put it to the skin to make that stroke, it's not flexing either way. If we are holding it at 90 degrees, it's going to stay at 90 degrees. So for us to get that muscle memory and to get that correct feeling of the angle and the pressure we need for it to stay that way, these are great training beginner blades. You can use these blades later in your career too. They're great for creating like really fluffy brows. But it is a great starter blade in that sense, that you're never going to improperly implant the pigment as long as you were holding it at that 90 degrees. This is using a curved blade here. I'm going to show you from above, but we're going to swap the angle too so you can see it from the side. So from above, you want the angle to be always at 90 degrees. You want it to look like this. You want your blade to be at 90 degrees to the practice pad in this case, but to your client's skin in other cases. And we want it to stay that way through each stroke. We don't want to go in leaning like this. Wow, it looks fine on the practice pad. It is going in sideways, implanting the pigment in properly. We don't want it to be leaning like this either. It's really hard, especially to get the correct direction and flow when you're not going in at your 90-degree angle. When you're going in at your 90-degree angle, you can curve it in your fingers. You can really go in any direction, right? Because it's at the correct angle. Same thing if you're using a U-blade, right? So it still, no matter what, needs to be at a 90-degree angle to the skin or to the practice pad in this case. So nice and even, right? So that we can actually have control and curve our strokes. Once again, if you're going in sideways, see how it's like almost opening like way too much? Once again, sideways, like that's so awkward, but like still you can see that it's opening so much more, and that's not only improperly implanting pigment, that's going to cause trauma to the skin and potentially even scarring as well. When we were talking about angle, you saw it from above, but this is how it should look from the side. It is going 90 degrees to the skin, not leaning like this, not leaning like this. It is always at 90 degrees when you make the entire stroke. That was with a U-blade. So with a curved blade, same thing. Always at 90 degrees. All pins touching at once, but at 90 degrees. Not leaning this way, not leaning this way, at 90 degrees when you make the entire stroke. So the final point when it comes to angles is the different blade type that you're like using. So a hard blade or a flexi blade. And I went over this more in the video of the anatomy of a microblade, but basically the difference is a hard blade is wrapped in metal. You can see that it's gold metal, whereas a flexi blade is wrapped in PVC plastic. And what makes them different is one is flexible and one is hard. So a metal blade, when you push on it, it's not moving, whereas a flexi blade, when you push on it, it flexes in the handle, right? So same thing happens in the skin. So this is something to keep in mind when making your stroke. So if you're making a stroke with a flexi blade and you're pushing too hard, even if your angle is perfectly upright, remember we want it to be a perfectly 90 degrees. If you're putting too much pressure on, it's gonna flex, just like when we pushed it on it, it flexed. When we push on it this way, it'll also flex. Whereas a hard blade won't do it at all, right? It's too hard, it's not gonna flex. So the upside to a hard blade is that when you're just starting out, you're not really sure on your pressure and your depth, a hard blade really controls that for you. You're not gonna get that flexing in the skin, making it potentially go in at an angle even though you're holding it at 90 degrees. The downside is that it is rigid, right? So with a flexi blade, we do have a little more control, we have a little more curving ability, and we can be a little more artistic, but each have their purpose for different stages and skills. And also these 14C curved hard blades are just so much fun to use when creating really big, fluffy, bold brows. Key number 2 is angle. If you haven't watched key number 1 yet, the video, go watch it now. Make sure you also hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the 3rd video in this series. I'm gonna put that out for you next week. I'll see you then.